Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today's presentation is on Surah Ibraheem, chapter 14, verses 22 to 29. These are the references. I have added one extra reference over here of the human self and Iblees because there is some details covered in one of the verses about Shaitan and Iblees, and I will briefly comment on that. And this is our context. Recap so far. The Quran helps those who wish to emerge from the darkness of the human psyche into the light of its guidance. The Quranic guidance provides an additional choice to mankind to opt for a life which is linked to the life of the hereafter. We know that the Quran has talked about and mentioned the darknesses. This is something which we need to keep it in mind all the time, that why do we need guidance? Because sometimes doubts arise, and some quarters say that there is an inbuilt guidance within human beings. And if that is the case, then Quranic guidance becomes null and void. Whereas we, having been on this path, we know that Quran does provide that guidance which is not inbuilt within us. The focus of the Quran initially is on the individual, and then it invites them to form a Jamaat of Mu'mineen, to make efforts to bring change within the human world so that mankind can live a life free from fear and grief. Without the guidance of the Quran, this is impossible to achieve. Next point is examples from history are quoted to provide evidence for the functioning of the law of requital, which holds every human deed accountable. Nothing in the universe goes unaccounted for, and everything follows the laws of Allah. And if we remember at the beginning of this chapter, there were example quoted from Pharaoh and Moses. And the idea is that to strengthen our resolve that what happened in the past is a model for us, that if the system of Deen could be established then, it could be established again. The guidance of the Quran can be understood by using intellect and reasoning and can be followed by every human being. The prerequisite is that we need to be seeking its guidance. Next point was many of those in positions of power reject the Quranic guidance as it goes against their desires, and they threaten to punish those who strive for Deen. One of the threats is stoning to death, and this punishment is favored by the kuffar according to the Quran. This is an important point because these things come up on the stage of sectarian religions. And we should keep it in mind that this is the punishment which is put forward by kuffar as noted in the Quran. Those who follow the Quran are given assurance of success in the establishment of the system of Deen if they remain firmly on the path designated by Allah. And the last point, there is a continuous tussle between al-haq and batil. And since the Quran is al-haq, hence its path leads to constructive results. The criteria for this is clearly defined in the Quran for our guidance. Now let us look at the first verse for today's presentation, 14:22. Human unbridled desires misguide man to eternal loss. All efforts of this life as a result go wasted. وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَعَدَكُمْ وَعْدَ الْحَقِّ وَعَدتُّكُمْ فَأَخْلَفْتُكُمْ وَمَا كَانَ لِي عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ إِلَّا أَنْ دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ لِي فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ مَا أَنَا بِمُصْرِخِكُمْ وَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِمُصْرِخِي إِنِّي كَفَرْتُ بِمَا أَشْرَكْتُمُونِي مِنْ قَبْلُ إِنَّ الظَّالِمِينَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And when the final outcome of this confrontation will have taken place, then Shaitan, i.e. the batil system of individual vested interests according to which these people were living, will say that there was one thing which the system of Allah had informed you of, so that matter having become a reality has now appeared before you. And there was one thing which I had said to you, that is the Shaitan. So this verse is explaining what the Shaitan is going to tell human beings. The consequences which you are facing is because of this. And the event has gone counter to it. That you wished one thing, then the results have gone against your desires. And that reality is this, that I did not possess any such power that I could make you follow me forcibly. Whatever took place is only this, that I called to you and you immediately assented to it and in this way accepted my solicitation. Because we know that human beings do not accept their own accountability and they think that whatever they desire, it will always produce good results for them. Therefore, do not level accusation at me, accuse your own self. Now I am also shrieking and wailing that I am done, and you are also howling and moaning that you are destroyed. The whole society is lamenting, young and old are clamoring, but neither I can be of any help to you, nor can you save me. That path which you had adopted prior to this, in which you used to follow my laws and commands as if they were the laws of Allah. I am free from any responsibility for that conduct of yours. You had adopted this of your own accord. The truth is that whichever people rebel against the laws of Allah, for them is a severe reckoning and destruction. There is a lot in this verse which need to be comprehended and picked up by us, so probably we'll be looking at it as we go through the Quran again and again. We know that Shaitan represents our own desires, our own emotions, our own intellect's manifestations. And there is more to it, which we will look at now. Few verses just to put things in true perspective. There's another verse, وَاسْتَفْزِزْ مِنْ اسْتَطَعْتَ مِنْهُمْ بِصَوْتِكَ وَأَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ بِخَيْلِكَ وَرَجَلِكَ وَشَارِكْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ وَعِدْهُمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. We know what tactics you, i.e. Iblees, will use to misguide them from the right path. So this is something which Quran has quoted from the side of Iblees. Some of them you will deceive from the path through the force of propaganda. Those who will not be influenced like this, you will assault them with big militias of yours, which will include soldiers and knights. And we can see the manifestation of this all around us. At places, you will hand over monetary benefits and will include them in your commerce, and in this way, through economic oppression, align them in tune with yourself. So this is what Iblis is supposed to do, and we can see this being manifested all around us. In some cases, you will open such educational places through which future generations will become colored automatically. Very important that as mankind spends its time and moves from one era to another era, if the values are weak, then future generations also suffer. You will make big promises to them, despite the fact that these will be based on self-deception and they will be deceived by you. The next verses, which is now more direct, previous one was the statement or the declaration from the side of Iblis, and the second one is direct. Elamu annama annamal hayatu dunya laibun wa lahbun wa zinatun wa tafakhurun bainakum wa takasurun fil amwali wal awlad. Their sights are only on the immediate physical benefits of life, despite the fact that compared to the elevated concept given by the Quran, the status of the physical benefits is merely like that of play and amusement. Quran has mentioned this fact in a number of other verses as well, that don't think that the life is laibun wa lahbun, which is that it is just as a play, just for entertainment, and there is no higher purpose to life. And we should keep that in mind, that our efforts in this life should produce positive results, which can only be a temporary pastime, or indulge in meaningless festivities, or have pride in the fact that I have far more possessions than others, or compete in the race to acquire wealth and progeny. So there's a lot of competition and competitiveness which is placed within human psyche, and the Quran has asked us that if you want to use that competitiveness, use it for the good of others. Excel each other in doing good rather than excelling each other in material possessions. So these are two very important verses which reinforce the same point, that Iblis and Shaitan are the forces, the negative forces with the emotions and desires within us which are not guided by Allah's way. And when these are unguided, so they think that the life will end with death. 1422, without bringing self-development into our focus, we remain concentrated on the physical side of our life. And we can observe it. This is evidence-based fact. First is, since our self acts through our physical body, the needs of our body become the focus of our attention during our life, which is fine, which is acceptable, if those are within the permanent values. And despite having the trait of metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, most do not think outside of the domain of physical needs or neglect the self's development completely. Verse 1422 is a description of the internal dialogue which we will have when we do not follow the path of Allah. So this is the conflict, this is the contradictions or opposing views which go on within our intellect. The Quran has drawn our attention towards the existence of ourself and its need for development using examples from our daily living. Iblees and Shaitan are presented as two important facets of our cognitive makeup at a fundamental level. This is important to understand for us. Iblees represents human proclivity for despair and hopelessness at two levels. Firstly, living life as if there is no hereafter. That is becoming hopeless about the existence of the hereafter, whereas hereafter exists. But Iblees says there is no hereafter, or I don't want hereafter. Becoming hopeless about the continuity of life beyond death, and thus never being able to draw out that side of the latent abilities which can only emerge through recognition of this fact. And second point is remaining in a state of desperation throughout life by pursuing immediate benefits and interests of the physical life. Next is Shaitan is related to unbridled human emotions and desires, which our unguided intellect aids in pursuing, and ultimately man realizes at some point in time during his lifetime that he has wasted his efforts on those things which have no value to his self. An undeveloped self is a wasted effort on a path which is one way. Now, continuing on this, there are some further reflections. The conduct of Iblees and Shaitan is glaringly visible around us in today's man-devised world. Media is operating 24/7, trying to manufacture content which they concoct deliberately in order to achieve their intended ends. One can say their satanic desires. Funded by the capitalist system, Pharaoh, Haman, and Qarun at the top of the world are apparently in full control. The Quran, by pointing to this state of affairs, invites us to not be overwhelmed by such a system and draw their attention to the fact that an alternative is available as a choice. Make the choice and then see how things start to fall in place for the better. So as part of this understanding, the first stage is to understand this system. That is, first understand our own psyche, what is going on within our own minds, removing that dissonance, and then understanding the way a word is, and then coming together as a need. So these are the things which indicate that one is on the right path, the path defined by the Quran. For this, the Quran has invited our attention to this fact that the key to our understanding lies in acknowledging the status of the Quran as a book for the human self, and about the influences to which the human self is subjected to both internally and externally. Knowledge about this will help us to become muttaqi. Being aware of Iblees and Shaitan helps us to stand up to these forces fairly and to confront these when the need arises. So knowing the opposing forces or the contradictions which are built within us at a default level is important, because these things, these ideas keep arising and we have to counter them. And Quran has pointed to this fact at numerous places. If we do not recognize the existence of ourself, then essentially we will not bring into our attention its needs. So if we do not know there is a self within us, then how are we going to address its needs? How can life then be perceived at a higher level than our physical existence? The Quran draws our attention to this life when it invites us to think hard by stating, this is a part of the verse which I have quoted over here. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu istajibu lillahi wal rasuli iza da'akum lima yuhyikum. I.e., O mu'mineen, respond to the call of Allah and Rasool, which is the Quran, when he calls you to that which will give you life. And all these mu'mineen were already alive. So the Quran is inviting them to a life. Which life? A new life, which they could only get through the message of the Quran, through the guidance of the Quran. Then the Quran explains to mu'mineen what life means, i.e., growing out of the animalistic existence and becoming that self which the Quran wants us to become, acquiring that self which carries out responsibilities under Deen. I know we have gone over these points a number of times before as well, but since these verses appear, we have to reiterate it for the benefit of those who might just be later on watching this presentation. Verse 1423, Iman and Salih deeds help acquire higher self, enabling it to qualify for a life of Jannat. وَأُدْخِلَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ جَنَّةٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِمْ تَحِيَّتُهُمْ فِيهَا سَلَامٌ. Contrary to this, those people who, by having Iman in the truth of the divine laws, act practically on his formulated program for the realization of potentials, they will be admitted into the Jannat of successes and prosperities, the springs of which will never experience autumn. So, Amanu wa amilu salihate, we have gone through this recipe. This is the formula of the Quran put forward in very simple words. And we have gone through what is Iman and what are the Salih deeds which help to grow that Iman. And there is more to it later on. And this will happen according to Allah's law of Rububiyyat. In this society of Jannah, the desire and endeavor of everyone will be that he should provide the maximum for the life and security of others. Now, let us look at two more verses after that. Verses 14, 24, 25. The human self based on Iman and Salih deeds grows just like a seed. Alam tara kaifa zaraballahu matalan kalimatan tayyibatan kashajaratin tayyibatin asluha sabitun wa far'uha fis samai. Tuti ukalaha kulla hine bezni rabbiha wa yadribullahu al-amtala lin-nasi la'allahum yatazakkarun. Now, these two verses point to a very beautiful metaphor, a parable. And over here, Quran has said that you see these things. And this is very interesting, and I will elaborate on that later on. Just to reflect how Allah elucidates these two opposing ideologies of life and systems of life by an allegory. An example of the successful ideology of life is like that of a delicious fruit tree whose roots are extremely deep, strong, and established, and its branches are swaying gently in the open breeze of the heavens, that it has grown extremely strong and is doing what it is meant to do, i.e., it should be established materially within economic life, and together with this, it should also be conversant with those lofty moral values whose fountainhead is beyond the physical universe. That tree, according to the law of Allah, keeps on bearing fruit continually in every era. Next is, in this way, Allah makes abstract and ideological realities clear through tangible similes so that people can understand these very well. The Quran has laid down the procedure for acquiring power, that is becoming Aziz, and this verse is, I have quoted it in relation to these two verses. Man kana yuridul izzata falillahil izzatu jamiyan ilayhi yasadul kalimul tayyibu wal amalu salihu yarfa'uhu wallazina yamkuruna sayyiati lahum azabun shadidun wa makru ulaika huwa yabur. Hence, the nation which wishes to benefit from the fresh life consisting of power and authority, respect and dignity, it should come to this understanding that authority and power all can be acquired through obedience to the laws of Allah. Very important, man kana yurido, that whoever wishes to have power from Allah, and they should understand that all power is within the laws of Allah. So that is an important point for us to understand, that what is this formula and how can we benefit from it. In this connection, this fundamental reality should be kept in mind, that for elevation and progression leading towards heights, two things are essential. Firstly, such a concept or ideology of life in which there is the potential to grow, expand, and to be able to produce pleasant outcomes. First thing is that ideology has to have inbuilt ability or potential to expand. It shouldn't just end in itself. That, for example, if we say that life ends with death, then essentially that ideology is finite. It's an infinite ideology, whereas Quran puts before us an infinite ideology which keeps growing. Secondly, those Salih deeds which raise this ideology upwards. So first thing is, we have to have some idea of an ideal self, a higher value system which does not end with death. And second is that having acquired that, how do we multiply its powers, its energies, its potentials? The ideology of life bestowed from the direction of Allah has this potential that it automatically keeps rising without any external support. Very important, just like a seed. When we grow it and the right environment is provided, then it grows through its own power, through its own potentials. But space is very slow according to human calculation and count. When human deeds provide support to it, then its pace is accelerated. So what Quran has done is it is pointing to us that contribute through your own efforts in this trial and error which is going on, and through evolutionary, progressive evolution, humanity is moving forward. But if you put in your efforts and join in with this process, then it will get accelerated. Contrary to this, those people who, adopting the wrong ideology of life, resort to such tricks due to which imbalances keep being created in human society, these tricks of theirs also end up futile, and they themselves also land in hell. So Quran also draws our attention that don't close your eyes while we are on this path of Iman and Saleh deeds, that what is going around us. We have to continuously keep an eye on Batil system, and as well as keep looking at the progress which is being made on the system of Al-Haq. Now, verses 1425, parable of a seed and its growth. I put down some comments over here. Here the Quran has gone for the visible metaphor of a fruit tree, which follows Allah's law from the creation of a seed containing all the potentials of a full-grown tree bearing fruit, which, if it is planted using the right kind of soil, with all other conditions for growth met, then it grows to its full potential. Firmly established in the soil and bearing fruit, and provides evidence of the functioning of the law of Allah in the outer world. So essentially, people like us who have come to this path, we are at an initial stage of understanding this whole process. The system hasn't been established where the future generations can benefit. This thing should be kept in mind, that initially far more efforts are required till the system starts growing just like a seed. The seed possesses all the potentials of a tree within itself, and when the correct environment is provided, it grows through its own potentials and utilizes nutrients and other factors to gain strength. So Allah, the ideology which is given by Allah, that is Kalimatullah, have that potential to grow if human efforts join with those efforts. That one seed then manages to produce numerous others like itself. The difference here is that it does not have choice. So the seed doesn't have a choice. The moment we get provided the right environment, it will bring out its potentials. Whereas we have choice that what kind of potentials we want to bring out of our own self. Provide the correct environment and it will follow the law of Allah. Contrary to this, man has the choice to help develop his own potentials, both known and unknown. Potentials are always there, just as with the seed. But the choice and intent need to be created by man himself. Very important. But the choice and intent need to be created by man himself. And here the Quran has provided guidance for that. The point which needs a close attention is this: why is so much emphasis placed on Iman by the Quran? Is it through Iman that we provide that environment for our latent potentials, which then leads to changing the purpose and outlook of our life? What change exactly occurs within our psyche which changes our inner world, and consequently we look at the outer world differently from others? So these points I put down at the end of this slide are something which we should keep it in mind when we are passing on Allah's message to others as well. That put these questions before them and say, what do you think is the purpose of this whole existence? What is the purpose of our life? Why human beings create problems for others? So these are the kind of questions which should arise in our mind, and then we say why Quran has put so much emphasis on Iman. An illustration: seed and the tree of the human self. First is, let us see, all these are the seeds, different seeds. There are thousands of varieties of seeds in the world, and we know about this fact. All seeds have the potential to grow. Earth provides the environment. Their life cycle begins here in the earth and ends here. So that is the point we should keep it in mind, that in the physical world, what is meant for the physical world, it begins here and then ends here. And that is the point we should keep it in mind as we progress through this slide. Second is, when right environment is provided, every seed can bring out its hidden potentials and bear fruits which it is destined to bear. These fruits are for mankind, none is marked for any one human being. If we look at the Quranic verses, again and again says, Kum, you, that is the whole of mankind. And this is something which we should keep back of our mind all the time. Now, this is the human one. If we see the seeds here, these have grown, and now every child arrives in the world through a biological process. If we look at the birth of human child, it is exactly like other animals. A sheep, cow, goat, they all have the same biological process through which they give birth to their progeny. The attributes of physical self are within the initial fertilized egg. And the potentials and all what is going to be formed, eyes, ears, brain, legs, heart, everything is within those initial fertilized egg. Nobody has given it to it. These are inbuilt in that. Physical death is part of this makeup. And when that fertilized egg comes out as a child, the death is inbuilt in that. The earth provides the physical environment for its life cycle. It begins here and ends here. So if we are concentrating on the physical side of our life, all our life, then essentially we are becoming finite and our life will end, whatever we call it, life that ends with death. And Allah is pointing our direction to a different life. And the next part of this slide will point to that. It begins here and ends here. Every child is equal as a human being at birth. Subsequent deviations are man-created. Now, this is something we should keep it in mind all the time, that all deviations which we see in the world are man-made. These are not created by Allah. These are created by human beings because of the dissonance which is within their own mind, which is meant to be removed. The human self has limited growth options without the guidance of Wahi, that too confined to this world only. Now we can see if we live this life as a physical being, how limited we are in terms of manifesting our potentials. It remains focused on physical needs, the acquisition of which it calls successful life. So what is the successful life of a physical being? Just to meet the needs of the body in this life. And that is why we will hear this phrase from many people, oh, this is one life. This is the only life I have. And his life was saved. These kind of terms indicate the state of thinking of these human beings. And Quran is actually moving us away from that to that new life with which that verse is pointing out, to which that verse is pointing our attention. Its new life enters into the arena of eternity through acceptance of Iman. So this is where Iman is important. That the Iman which we acquire through the Quran should give us the assurance of the hereafter. And it is based on choice. It doesn't come by birth. And then develops through salih deeds. This growth multiplies when it is in the company of mu'mineen. This is very important for us, that it is not something, a lonely journey, that I sit in my house and home and I say myself is developing and I do not get that urge to be with others through the Iman which I have acquired. That Iman is very faulty, very contaminated. Deen becomes its destination in this world. And then that should become its destination when we come to this. So we have seen that we are at a very initial stages of comprehending these facts. And as we will develop through this, we will see that the world will change within us. And of course, the world around us will also start to transform. The latent potentials for the human self come with the physical self as part of choice and intent through I. It is not governed by physical laws, hence no death. So at a level of I, there is no death. It just tastes death of the physical self. The Quran provides details of the formula for its development. So we need to develop this potential to look at the self and its life differently from the physical self. While we are making effort and striving, physical conveniences of life are important, and this will be part of the system of Deen. Human life is far more than the physical life. Now let us move to the next verse, 1426. Any structure raised on weak foundations cannot last very long. And it's interesting, the next parable which Quran has used is of kalimatin khabisatin. وَمَثَلُ كَلِمَاتٍ خَبِيثَةٍ كَشَجَرَةٍ خَبِيثَةٍ اجْتُثَّتْ مِنْ فَوْقِ الْأَرْضِ مَا لَهَا مِنْ قَرَارٍ. In opposition to the above simile, the wrong ideology and system of life is like a worthless tree. We have seen that if ideology which human beings are following is finite, then it doesn't matter how much they define success, inverted commas, in this life, that is worthless, because it has no end, it has no success, it has no prosperities attached to it. It ends with death, whose roots are rotten just at the surface of the ground so that whoever wishes can uproot it. The system which is not compatible with the ethical divine values can never have strength and stability. This is because if a nest is made on a fragile branch, it will be weak and will not last very long. Two verses relating to human psyche and its domain of understanding. I've quoted these two verses from Surah Kaf. I thought they are great to understand a few points which are mentioned in these verses. فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ أَثَارِهِمْ إِن لَّمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَٰذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. And I have highlighted this part, which I would like to emphasize a bit more later on. O Rasool, we know that you have a heart full of compassion within you, but if these people do not accept Iman on such evident reality, then would you fret yourself to death? So this is for us not to get worried about it. We should understand at a very fundamental level that the only self about which we are responsible, the self which we want, the self is our own, which should acquire Iman. Other selves to whom we pass on the message, it is not within our responsibility or remit to force them to have Iman. A forced Iman in any case has zero value in the book of Allah because it does not bring that change within them. Whatever is on the face of planet Earth, we have made it glittering and a reason for attraction. Allah has created this attraction for ourselves to understand it and then counter it by developing own self. So these are not created just to be pursued all the time. These are to be utilized within the permanent values of the Quran. We have made it glittering and a reason for attraction so that it becomes evident in its use and application who it is that adopts the path of balance and justice, which is indeed the path leading to a harmonious life. Quran has over here used this term لَنَبْلُوَهُمْ, which means the word is created in a way so that we cannot avoid its challenges. This is part of our self-development or growth process. If we are not being faced with challenges or we do not create enough for us, that means our self will go stagnant right in this life. So this is something which should keep it in mind, that what is happening in the world in the absence of al-haq, and though it is batil, but still we have to strive and understand it and then pass on the message of Allah so that haq can emerge out of this batil. And over here, Quran has mentioned ahsanu amala, that is the balanced deeds, the harmonious deeds, which the conduct which through our own self's conduct we promote in the world wherever we are. Verse 1426, the tree which fails to establish itself withers away quickly. The term khabisatin means disgusting, dislike, contamination, rotten, deceit, barren land, batil, etc. If you remember the previous verses where it was said that kalimatun tayyibatun, and tayyib is the one which grows within the permanent values, which manifests divine attributes. Here it means that ideology of life which looks like that tree whose fruit is not flourishing and does not lead to any nutritional benefits. And we can relate to the trees around us, and we can see that what is going on in the world, there are literally people who are on the wrong path. Hence, planting and growing such a tree wastes human efforts. And it's a terribly sad state of affairs that human beings suffer so much, and particularly those human beings to whom the message of the Quran is presented, or who have Qurans in their own homes, and they do not make use of it. And as a result, not only they suffer themselves, they are making the humanity suffer as well. Even a tree which grows but does not bear intended fruit, all efforts have gone to waste in planting it and helping it to grow. An important reality to which the Quran has drawn our attention here is that human life flows in one direction, and each one of us should aim at deriving the best from this life as well as from that life which is awaiting us in its continuity beyond our physical death. The seed for the hereafter is created here, planted here, nourished and brought to fruition in this life before this tree of our solid life is taken to the hereafter after our physical death. Our efforts in this life of ours must not go wasted. So that is the bottom line which we need to keep in mind all the time, that since we have come to the Quran, now let us get the best out of it. Being conscious of this fact provides us with the motivation and incentive to remain on the path of Allah. To check the growth and blossoming of this tree, we need to be using the Quran as a criterion all the time. So we should develop those potentials. I know we have, but this is really a presentation for the wider public. We should bring out the best within us. This will provide us with evidence when we see others around us. We do not take these facts and values into account in their life. Explaining these issues to them is an important part of the growth process of ourselves. So once we understand these things, and I'm sure we have, then we can pass it on to others. We can share to them and tell them that there is far more to life than merely pursuing the physical conveniences of this life. Not to be attracted or distracted by the glamour and what glittering which is going on around us. We should be able to look through the reality. 1427, Jamaat-e-Momineen are reassured here. يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ يُضِلُّ اللَّهُ الظَّالِمِينَ وَيَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ. In this way, according to this robust ideology of life, Allah bestows strength and establishes the Jamaat-e-Momineen, just like that tree, in both their worldly life and the life of the hereafter. And then it says, and those people who rebel against this system, their efforts go to waste. All this takes place according to the law of Mashiach of Allah. 1427, the results of the law of Mashiach of Allah materialize in this life as well as in the hereafter. The Quran deals with the realities of human life and draws our attention to this fact that whatever we do individually and collectively in this life is bound to produce results both in the physical domain as well as in the domain relating to the human psyche. Important point over here for us is that we should be able to understand these effects which are taking place within our psyche. That how much dissonance we had when we came to the Quran and how much of it has already been removed and what potentials now we are manifesting in our individual and collective life. And this is an important point, because if we do not concentrate on this and not try to understand this, then we will become frustrated, because lack of change within our psyche indicates that we haven't grasped the effect of Iman on us, the effect of solid deeds on the growth of this Iman. That means the new life which we have created within us, we haven't started to benefit from it. While it is straightforward to see results in the physical domain, the effects on our psyche are not really visible, especially if we are not aware of this process or wish to deliberately ignore these. So that is why sometimes we hear this kind of sound bites that, oh, we are doing nothing and we are not making any progress, we should be doing something practical, and these kind of things arise because we haven't understood the effect on our Iman and through the solid deeds which we are doing to strengthen it. That in a system of Deen, we cannot create a small kind of a project here or there in the land of Shaitan and Iblees. We have to first strengthen our potentials, bring out those best within us, so that we understand the truth, the reality of human existence around us, the reality of the system of Pharaoh, Haman, and Qarun around us. So these are the things which we need to understand fully before we take the next step. Okay? The Quran has reminded us to acquire and develop the power to discern the potentials within ourselves which appear in the shape of strengthening our character. For example, acquisition of the divine attributes, overcoming obvious weaknesses, utilizing time effectively, being aware of our thinking and decision making, reminding ourselves of the permanent values, promoting good and forbidding evil, solid deeds, unity of hearts. Very important, this unity of hearts. By coming together, by sharing with each other, by talking to each other and strengthening each other's resolve is part of this development of the self process. As we know, the Quran has asked us to enhance our inner consciousness to a very elevated level so that our outer world starts to change around us. We firstly notice the change in our own outlook and conduct, and then others notice as well. By coming together, we begin to think in the light of the Quran and our differences disappear. If differences stay, then it means that we haven't reached that stage. If these do not, then we need to take note and make efforts to remove these. Remember, Leaving differences between us will not unite our hearts and minds, and such a state of our nerve is of no use to Allah. It cannot simply establish Deen. That is the bottom line in that. If we haven't removed those differences, if we haven't understood the Quran and then applied it to remove those differences, and we have reservations, then obviously we are not much use to Allah's system of Deen. Verses 14, 28, 29, those on kufr lead others to ruin as per the law of Allah. Alam tara alladhina baddalu ni'matallahi kufran wa ahallu qawmahum darul bawar jahannama yaslawnaha wa bisal qarar. I've highlighted some of these. I thought need a bit of more focus from our side. Ni'matallah, that what are the name of Allah, and then darul bawar, that what is that place, that situation, that state in the world which the nation suffer. Keeping this law of Mashiach before you, cast an eye now on the history of worldly nations. Just look at the state of these leaders of nations who were provided with the conveniences and abundances of life, but they did not value these. They employed these unjustly, and bringing the caravan of their people to such a market in which there was an environment of slump everywhere. They deposited them there where there was none to buy their saleable products, i.e. plunged them into a hell of devastation and ruin. And what an evil place this was in which they deposited their caravan. Now, in relation with this, I have quoted a few more verses just to illustrate this and also point to the state of the world around us. Few verses on the state of affairs around us. وَكَمْ قَسَمْنَا مِنْ قَرْيَةٍ كَانَتْ ظَالِمَةً وَأَنشَأْنَا بَعْدَهَا قَوْمًا آخَرِينَ فَلَمَّا أَحَسُّوا بَأْسَنَا إِذَا هُمْ مِنْهَا يَرْكُضُونَ لَا تَرْكُضُوا وَارْجِعُوا إِلَى مَا أُتْرِفْتُمْ فِيهِ مَسَاكِنِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُسْأَلُونَ قَالُوا يَا وَيْلَنَا إِنَّا كُنَّا ظَالِمِينَ. We destroyed many such nations who were bent upon doing injustices, and then in their place new nations are made to rise. We have seen this law of establishment and replacement of nations if we look at the human history. And when Quran says we destroyed, of course, these nations and their leaders destroyed themselves. And we are seeing that process taking place right in front of us in different nations and as a world, as a whole as well. That it is declining, and human beings are doing to themselves. They were warned about the consequences of their deeds, but they used to not pay attention to these warnings. And that is the worst thing which human beings do. If I have eaten something, I've taken some food which has caused problem, and if I keep taking that, for example, something which will make me fat, then of course that will bring up the diseases which will appear later on. And nothing happens in the world without a warning. There are warnings inbuilt in whatever we do. The imperceptible results kept creeping forward until the time that these became visible. They started to run away. So when these things they did wrong, and the wrong results started to appear, then they said, oh, I will go from this part of land to another land. And then they arrived there, and the same thing happened over there. And then a stage will come where you cannot go anywhere in the world. There are restrictions everywhere. And I think we have reached that stage. But that was not the time to abscond. And our law of requital called out that, where can you run away to? Do not run. Return to those hedonistic conducts and to your palaces where you felt secure. Go there so that you are questioned about how all this was built, on whose hard work, and what was your contribution in this. So Quran says that they will be asked, Masakinukum la'allakum tusalun, that how did you build all these infrastructures? With whose help? Who were the poor whose efforts were utilized here and they were not paid adequately? So these are the things which Quran points our attention to, so that we learn a lesson. But then, of course, if we cross a certain limits, which Quran has very well defined over here, some limits are defined over here in this, قَالُوا يَا وَيْلَنَا إِنَّا كُنَّا ظَالِمِينَ, that a stage come where they themselves then admit that we did wrong. And we can see through the social media how much of the worst of the past is coming before our eyes. At that time, they had to acknowledge this fact that they truly were unjust and were regretful on their conduct. And if we see the subsequent verses, it will tell us that what happened to those nations. Verses 14, 28 to 29, decline of nations is inbuilt within their own evil conduct. These verses hold great significance in understanding the state of the world in 2022. I just put down this here so that subsequently, hopefully, these presentations will stay on YouTube, and maybe in 50 years' time, somebody is reading it, and hopefully by then, if the system is better, they can understand that what happened to these nations in 2022. When we come to the Quran and see the state of the world created by the human intellect, we feel overwhelmed and think, how is this system going to be replaced? It appears to be an impossible task. Here the Quran noted that those who follow the paths created by their unbridled intellect and desires are bound to reach a stage when their decline will commence through their own hands. Their power over their own affairs will start to diminish, and this decline will be based on evidence. They will, however, think that it is all temporary. And this is something which comes to my mind as well when I go through the Quran and analyze these verses, that what is happening even today is that through their own hands, in a system in which the seeds of self-destruction are already inbuilt, and through quantitative easing and through the control of monetary system, they are trying to put new life into it. They think they will get away with it, whereas whatever human beings are doing, particularly at the top, that is contributing to this self-destruction. Here the Quran guides us to keep persevering on our path of al-haq and to never be fearful or feel vulnerable, as this will affect our psyche. If we give up or we become disheartened or we are going to despair and say, these meetings, these lectures, going through these verses makes no difference, the world remains the same, then we should look at these verses on a longer time scale. And secondly, what about our own end in this life? I'm not going to be in this world forever. If I'm going to die, and the day I die, then that is the end of my connection with this life. So we have made so much effort. It is better to stick to this path in the interest of our own self-development and the fact that the life of the hereafter exists. If we say that life of the hereafter does not exist, then of course this path is not for us. We should just leave it and go somewhere else where we can meet our desires and we can get the best from this declining world. In fact, this should strengthen our iman, as this provides evidence of the functioning of the law of requital. In verse 21:14, another important sign is noted that before entering the final stage of removal, these nations will reach a stage where their hidden crimes will start to emerge in the open. This is something which we are witnessing via global social media. The interesting part is that this media created by Iblees is exposing Iblees itself. I will just repeat it. The interesting part is that this media created by Iblees, if you remember the verses on Iblees, that I will misguide them using every method and technique to misguide them, and is exposing Iblees itself. However, as world events depend upon human choices and decision making, hence forecasting the future trend is quite difficult. We do not know how long this decline will take place. And this decline, if that can be reversed as well, for example, if the system of Deen emerges somewhere as a model, then of course it can be reversed. The only prediction that can be made is that nations go down by their own deeds. During this process, we keep in mind the consequences of not following this path of Allah by witnessing the decline of those forces which oppose the rububiyyat of Allah. Recognizing this aspect is part of the self-development process, and this adds strength to our character, which is so essential for the system of Deen. We need to acquire the conviction that Allah's responsibilities in the human world are carried out via the hands of Mu'mineen, and that we are those who will do this. And with that, we come to the end of this presentation. And thanks for your time and for sharing it.